I'd say that I generally agree with what Gautam says.
Yeah, the principle and rule.
But maybe I'll just add a small personal caveat or more personal explanation, because I think for me it was actually linked to we had something called at Hyderabad, we had the Asian Social Forum. I had gone for the Asian Social Forum, and I think for the first time, I think I met this guy from Delhi who was at the Asian Social Forum, and incredibly articulate and like fantastic in terms of his understanding of politics, understanding of queer issues and stuff like that. I said, I really want to continue having this conversation with this guy because he's really fascinating. So I said, hey, shall we edit a book on this together? He said, yes, let's do it. And so that's the way it began. Yeah.
This is the problem with third person.
So I think, that would be just my personal addition to that point.
But that seminar was really interesting because it was a seminar called, in the Asia Social Forum, it was the first, there were two fascinating seminars at the Asia Social Forum. One was, it was run by a group called PRISM at that point. And it was the first time. World Social Forum. No.
2004 in
Did we do intersectionality at the Social Forum also?
I know.
But that's true. It's part. I mean, what's interesting is what you see here on the cover is the cover of the second edition. But the first edition of the book had this amazing photograph from one of the protest/celebrations called Rainbow Planet from the World Social Forum in 2004. And it was just such a powerful moment because PRISM did organize. I'll let you speak about that in a second. PRISM organizes a wonderful panel at the World Social Forum, which had activists literally from all over the world talking about the experience of sexuality through activism, practice, theory, etc. And it was really interesting to have fora like that, where sort of an international queer politics could be discussed in India. But do you want to talk about that?
It was also the way, because the discussions we were having at that point, and there was also that masculinities conference in Hyderabad right before that, right? No, it was in Bangalore. I clearly have very bad sense of this history that I'm making up as I go along. But there was a masculinities conference somewhere. I remember we also had this conversation, and it was it was Vinay, Chandran and Swabhava who had organized it. And it was that, because the question really at that point felt like, what is it that one will say? And so one of our friends, Akshay Khanna, would kept saying, well, if you want a voice, what are you going to say when you get it? And so that was the second question. It wasn't enough to just start speaking. The whole question was, and especially if it was going to be this sort of first set of articulations out, and that's the conversation that was evolving around the World Social Forum. And this idea of intersectionality had come up, right? That you couldn't separate sexuality, race, caste, class, gender, religion and ability, and you couldn't do it because at that point there was this idea in PRISM that what do you mean by gay rights? And in the West, the whole language was equal rights. Gay people are the same as straight people, right? You want equal rights. But here, the conversation we were having is that straight people in India have no sexual rights. And so it's not like heterosexual Indians are walking around with freedom to love, freedom to choose, that they aren't getting burnt by khap panchayats, that they can't step across lines of... So we were sitting here and saying, what does it mean to have compulsory marriage, of a particular kind, as your ideal for equal rights? And that's partly it partly came out of the experience of us, being in Delhi University colleges and realizing that when you talked about sexuality politics, the first people who understood you were 21-year-old women. And if there were 21-year-old women from Shillong in Delhi, then they understood you even before you started speaking. Because all the questions of unnatural, abnormal, against Indian culture, questions of policing, of violation, of self-doubt, was a much broadly shared experience. It was not just peculiar to LGBT people. So I think what happened is that this sense of intersections really allowed us to talk about sexuality in a different way from a sort of Western discourse of equal rights, of LGBT rights. And the sense of queerness came out of that. And the question was, queer for us was everything that was not Mr. and Mrs. Gupta. Everything that was not Mr. and Mrs. Gupta, where Mr. Gupta was 1.5 inches taller than Mrs. Gupta, made exactly 25% more monthly income. They came from the same caste, the same, religion, the same whatever. And then the idea that actually no one lived in this heteronormative ideal, like no one actually lived this life.
And that's interesting because the title of your book says queer politics very explicitly. In 2005, the word queer was used not very much. And LGBT, I think, is also still used a lot, but at that time, LGBT was essentially what our politics was called, or gay, for those who didn't have any other words for it. And I think it was a particularly important decision on the part of both of you to use the word queer politics. So, do you want to talk about why you use the word queer? Who twisted whose arm?
Just a simple point, I think. I think from whatever Gautam has described so far, the idea was really how do you get on board a range of politics really within the world that we want to imagine. And I think the word queer, in a most simple sense, the way we thought of it, is really questioning the norms of gender and sexuality. And how you question the norms of gender and sexuality could be in diverse ways. It could be a transgender person who questions the fact that biological birth is not linked to the gender in which one inhabits. It could be a person who says that sex work is a form of work. It could equally be a person who says that sexuality is fluid. It's not just gay or lesbian. The range of positions one could occupy. So really, I think in some ways, I think the word queer also came to us from who we quoted this activist from Bangalore, who some of you all might know, a wonderful activist called Pamela, who committed suicide almost not 9 years ago. I think
right after
maybe 10 years now after this. But she would, for example, in every public performance, a public event she's spoken, she'd always begin by saying, "I'm a bisexual, hijra, sex worker," and that's really fantastic. Because everybody is like shocked. Okay, what do you mean? I mean, because everybody, including gay men, including heterosexual people, including hijras, everybody. Because I mean, it's like you're questioning so many norms at the same time. And she, in some ways, I mean, though the word queer comes from maybe a Western context, clearly it comes from a Western context. I mean, it clearly, for us, it embodied or described a certain form of radical politics which is actually being lived out in the lives of people we knew.
Yeah, and I think, there was, and Pamela is actually the exact example of it. The book is dedicated to her, and she also represented, I mean, queerness, it was one of those things, it's like, it wasn't necessarily just identity. Like, it was a lot in that sense like feminism, right? It was a perspective, it was a politics, it was a viewpoint. And we used it partly also to say that, to signal something new, to challenge it, and to say because every part of the book felt like a reclamation. So taking back the word felt equally important. And then there was this, I don't remember this discussion, then there was this very clear discussion that if you put the word gay or lesbian on the cover of the book, no bookstore will keep it. And it's a very clear discussion. Our publisher was like, it wasn't the discussion that tilted it. In the end, actually, at least we like to think we took this grand political intellectual discussion. But every time we had this discussion, Arpita Das, who's the publisher of the book, she's like, that's all fantastic and very smart. But if you put gay and lesbian, I can't sell it. And we were like, that's great. But the reasons for our choice, etc. And we had a hard time with the book in any way. The bookstore still didn't carry it. And when it opened, they didn't carry it for a number of reasons until the first big reviews came out in the newspapers. We had a very hard time getting the book stocked at that point.
One of the most fascinating parts of Because I Have a Voice is just the sheer diversity of voices in the book itself. And I remember being at the launch of the book in Bangalore in 2005, and Lawrence Liang of the Alternative Law Forum was speaking. And it was a really interesting conversation where he spoke about just how different kinds of voices, not different kinds of people, but different kinds of voices. Some were shouts and screams, some were hushed whispers, some were whimpers. Different kinds of voices inhabited this book. And not only do you have different kinds of voices inhabiting this book, you do have different people from a diverse range of social backgrounds. Now, do you want to talk about how you went about creating and bringing in those different voices, and perhaps what kind of voices were left out in spite of all your efforts?
Yeah, just I went back to trying to see what was Lawrence's point in 2005 as to what are the different kinds of voices. And I think the kind of voices you have is one is, of course, the scream, which is in a marvelous essay by Vaibhav Saria, where he talks about, I'm out and here's why. And that tells you the politics of the scream. Then there's also the more nuanced one, which is the voice of someone like Satya, who's a transgender person, who's a female to male transgender person. And it's really nuanced because what Satya captures is he's a female to male transgender person and he's living his life as a male, but obviously he's never tied a lungi in his life, you know. And so he's going to somebody's house and then this person says, hey, looking at him struggle to tie a lungi and says, shall I help you tie the lungi? And the person helps him tie the lungi. And then at that moment, he also feels that affirmation, you know, the fact that he's seen as a man. And it's seen in this simple gesture of really tying that lungi, as it were. Then there's, of course, a questioning voice as well, which is once again interesting because we're talking about parents, because we have this father who writes a letter to this group called Council Club in Calcutta and says, you know, what is it about gay people? Do they always have multiple partners? Do they always have sex all the time? What is it about gay people? And that's the kind of questioning voice which is there as well. And of course, Pawan responds to it in a voice of reason, but that's otherwise. Then there's I mean, if you're looking at the range of experience, there's also the question of death. There's once again this voice by Devdutt Patnaik who talks about the death of a gay man. And once again, it captures the reality of a period, of a time before maybe organized groups were really there or had massive outreach. Because you're talking about men who just meet each other on maybe street corners, maybe end up having sex once, maybe a second time, and suddenly you find that the guy you had sex with 1, 2, 3 times is not there anymore. You go around asking everybody says actually he's not there. And then suddenly you find out that he's dead, you know. And so a range of these 5, 6 men go to his house, you know, to see that somebody who mattered as far as they were concerned is dead. And they go in and try and grieve for that particular person. And see, he captures the complexity of, I mean, how do you grieve for someone when you're not acknowledged as a presence in that person's life? How do you grieve for someone when how do you go to the person's house? What do you describe yourself as yourself as? Who are you as far as the family is concerned?
And you know what I loved about that particular story, just a quick interjection, was that it wasn't the typical story of this was my partner of the last 10 years. It wasn't. Yeah. It was I met him once. That's it. And you know, this is a particular kind of story that is, I think, so particular to queer life, of what the intimacy of this short encounter means to queer people. Mm-hmm. Partly because for the longest time you imagined that it was all you would ever have, that actually life would be a series of these kinds of fleeting encounters, partly because your automatic notions of what it means to love and be with people don't stretch over decades. You don't think in forevers. You just don't, because you know you never saw the movies growing up and you never read those books, and people like you didn't live forever, and you couldn't think of one person who was 60, and so. But it wasn't necessarily a depressing thought, and you know what I mean. When you say it this way, it sounds like a little sort of tragic kind of moment, but it wasn't. But
it was the idea of how your life would be.
It was the idea that if this is love and this love is as valid, then even for that fleeting encounter, you go to that man's funeral. Right. You go to Kay's funeral because what it was at that moment was real. It was true, and holding on to that moment of truth was just as important as living with someone for 20 years, you know, and I've always loved that about queer life. I've always loved the equivalent importance to the moment as to the lifetime. And I think that, you know, and to celebrate it, to take the death of that person as seriously. You know, in that story, it always struck me at how when we both read it, we were like, yeah, this is actually, you need to go. And when I read it, I was like, if this happened to me, I would go. You know, sorry.
And one more voice, the mystical voice. I think you should just talk about it. She comes from the world of space.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Actually, I have to read this back about because one of my single favorite pieces in the book is by Maya Sharma, and Maya Sharma is coincidentally also the first queer person I ever met in India, like ever. Like she was, I had just come back from college. And I got in touch with Prism, and I went to her, and she was a labor union activist with the Hind Mazdoor Sabha in Delhi. And she had an office behind just off the ITC hotel on Barakamba Road. And so she said, come meet me at Bengali Sweets. And I was like, I'm going to meet a gay Indian person. Like, it was this moment, you know, and it was this amazing thing. And out comes this 5'2" white-haired woman being like, hi. And it was just, visually, it was just nothing I could have imagined, right? And she was just incredible. She was 50 years. She was like, my God, the men labor union activists don't let me use the computer in the office. Like, it was like, that's our conversation at Bengali Sweets. And she wrote this incredible book that Yoda published later called Loving Women, Being Lesbian in Unprivileged India. But one of the stories that we took from here was called, it's called She Came from the World of Spirits, right? And it's about these two women in Gujarat, in a small town, hours from anywhere, somewhere in Kutch. And you know, there are these two women, they live together in the village, they have a child, they raise it, and they're together. And no one ever uses the word lesbian, there's no queer, there's no gay, there's nothing. There are just these two women who live together and raise a child. And so Maya's like, what is this life? How do you explain this life? There's no flag, there's no slogan, there's no parade. Here are these two women in this village, in traditional village India that is intolerant, backward, historical, etc. And so then she goes and she says, who is she to you? And the classic question of love and belonging. Who is she to you? And I just read you the reply. Their names are Hasina and Fatima. And she goes, lifting her smiling brown eyes, Hasina shared the moment of her first meeting with Fatima in a whisper. She said, I was standing by the well in the Kacheri compound one day, all dressed up in red. At that time, he, and she always uses the word he to talk about Fatima, he emerged from the well and told me, I love you. He came for me disguised as a woman and cast on me a magical spell I cannot explain. I cannot live without her. Okay, so now there's a full, like there's no, and what I love about this is that there's no need to resolve this. Like there's no tension here. Him, her, he, I cannot live without her. She has not come from your and my world. She has come from the world of spirits. That was that. And if you asked anyone in the village, they would say, Hasina, she lives with Fatima. Who is Fatima? She takes care of Hasina. Finished. It was this sense, you know, of writing this other mystical, you can call it mystical, but it just felt so plain. It was like plain speaking. It was simple and it was easy, and it was the richness of that kind of diversity of voice. And it also, I think, brought back a lot of those early tensions when the queer movement was going, which is, do you need to have a voice at all? Should you have a voice? Should you speak?
Should you have a name?
Do you have a name? And that was the thing. And there was a whole lot of tension saying, if you speak now, we will lose what little space we have. Right? So the line used to always be, "Khamoshi mein bhi bahut jagah hoti hai."